Hello, everybody, and welcome to the very first episode of Disney World Playlist. Now, this is a brand new series I'm trying out. I don't know if there's going to be more episodes. I figured I'd make one, we'd see how it goes, and we just take it from there. This is an interesting idea that I had a couple of months back, actually, and I've been playing around with it, and I wanted to come up with a way to sort of look at all of the attractions at Disney World in a different light. I love talking about these attractions. I love talking about them, in different ways, whether it's about the history or what I love about them. And I thought one cool way to do it would be to sort of make playlists out of them, to sort of make a little itinerary. And so the idea of this series is that at the top of each episode, I'll pick a theme, whether it's one I come up with or maybe you guys suggest, that is sort of a generalized theme. It's not very specific. It's not very obvious either. Today we're going to be doing the theme Indiana Jones, right? Which sounds specific, but if you go with me, you'll see where I'm going with this. The idea is I come up with a mini itinerary for a day at Walt Disney World that sort of fits within that theme one way or another, and I talk a little bit about what I would pick for that itinerary and why I think it fits with that theme. And so I guess you'll understand hopefully a little bit more as I go through this, but I figured the best way to do it is to just jump right in. So our theme this week, like I said, is Indiana Jones, a fantastic trilogy of movies because the fourth one doesn't exist. And this actually got a lot more difficult than it was when I first thought of the idea of the series, because back when I thought of it, Indiana Jones Stunt Spectacular was still open, and so it was an easy, obvious attraction to pick. So now that it's closed, I had to go for something else. So I'm going to pick 4 or 5 attractions. I'm going to pick a place to eat lunch. I'm going to pick a place to eat dinner. And I'm going to talk about why I picked them and why I think they sort of fit within the sort of really broad and general theme of Indiana Jones. So let's kick it off. So here we are at the Jungle Cruise in Adventureland in the Magic Kingdom. This is my first pick. It isn't like a top 5 list. These aren't in any specific order. I think the Jungle Cruise sort of really is a pretty obvious choice. I think you could see really easily why I'd pick it. It sort of has this jungle theme that really feels like, a throwback to the beginning of Raiders of the Lost Ark. It sort of has that adventurous theme that just sort of is encapsulated by Indiana Jones as a character. You've got all the wild animals, just going through the jungle. It's just a very Indiana Jones-esque experience, especially because everything themed, the theming for this attraction is just very old school, right? It's not like you're in a modern day cruise, like jungle cruise setting. It is very antiquated, sort of matches the time period of the Indiana Jones series, and so it very much was like one of the first attractions that popped into mind when I started thinking of, what attractions would make me feel like I'm in an Indiana Jones film. Next up, we hop on over to the Animal Kingdom for a ride at Expedition Everest. Now, I know what you might be thinking, this has like so little to do with Indiana Jones. Indiana Jones never went in search of a Yeti. He never went to Mount Everest, but at the same time, similar to the Jungle Cruise, it has this very old school adventurous feel to it with this very highly detailed queue. The idea that, you're looking for the Yeti does sort of, in a way, I feel like, sum up the spirit of Indiana Jones, and that, that's a movie series where they're always going for something very grounded and realistic, but then some element of the supernatural or the mythical comes into play. So I just thought, in that sense, this does feel like a very Indiana Jones-esque adventure. This seems like something he would go on. And on top of that, and this is sort of like a weird connection to make, this reminds me a lot of Uncharted 2, which has the main protagonist, Nate Drake, go to a very similar region. And I think it's generally accepted that Nate Drake is highly inspired by Indiana Jones. So there's sort of like the 2 degrees of separation. But I just feel like this also, in a very adventurous way, has that Indiana Jones feel to it. This doesn't remind me of a specific movie. It just reminds me of the sort of adventure I could see Indiana Jones going on if they were ever to make a 4th movie, because as we know, there have only ever been 3 Indiana Jones films, and maybe one day they'll make a 4th one, but until that day, we'll just have to live with the 3 that we have. Next up, we'll pop on over to Disney's Hollywood Studios, where we'll grab some lunch at the Brown Derby. Now, I picked the Brown Derby for this playlist because I feel like, even though it's not the sort of place that I don't think Indiana Jones has ever eaten, this part of the park was made to really recreate the sort of golden age of Hollywood in California, those 1930s, 1940s, which is right around when the films take place. And so just that sort of 1940s theming of, you know, Hollywood where it's nice and fancy, it just sort of really has a callback, at least to me, to that era and to those films. And really, like, when you look at pictures of the interior, it's sort of, I want to say it partially reminds me of when Indiana and his father are on the Zeppelin in The Last Crusade. It's sort of like that high-scale, fancy 1940s theming, minus the Nazis. And I think it's just one of those things that reminds you of the few scenes in the trilogy where he's not in the jungle, he's not in the wild, he's not going on adventures, he's still, you know, back in civilization in the first world, and you get reminded of that sort of decadence. For instance, also kind of a little bit reminds me of the beginning of the Temple of Doom when he's in the club, in the Obi-Wan club. So this is where I would go for some Indiana Jones lunch. Next up, since we're right there when we finish lunch, I'd head on over to the Great Movie Ride, and this is probably the most obvious, I think, of the choices for this playlist, and that's because this is the one attraction that, well, I wouldn't say features, but has Indiana Jones in it, whether it's the trailer when you're waiting on the queue, or the fact that Indy and the snakes and the scenes from Raiders of the Lost Ark are in the attraction. I mean, what else gets you in that Indiana Jones mood than actually going through one of the scenes from the film? And on top of that, there's the trailer, which I think, you know, that fantastic John Williams score and just that great old school movie trailer feel to it sort of throws it into that mood a bit. And on top of that, you know, you're here in the Chinese theater and you're going through the golden age of cinema, which again just sort of calls back to the era that those films take place in, and sort of helps you, you know, get in the mood a little bit. Then we would head back to the Magic Kingdom, and if you haven't guessed already, these playlists are not very practical itineraries since they're doing so much traveling back and forth, just more of like a fun gathering of all these attractions. And we would head on over to Frontierland to ride Big Thunder Mountain Railroad. And I picked this attraction for the playlist specifically because it very much reminds me of the opening sequence of Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, when you have young Indy sort of going on the adventure when he steals the treasure from the original person sporting the fedora, going through sort of like the Southwest desert area. And that's really all it is. It's, you know, there's a train, it's in the desert, it sort of matches the theming of this attraction. And when I thought of it, it just totally jumped at me and reminded me of Indiana Jones when I was trying to think of this playlist. So I think it was an easy in for this playlist. And then maybe to grab a bite to eat for dinner, I would head on over to the Animal Kingdom to the Yak and Yeti restaurant over in Asia. Now, I picked the Yak and Yeti mainly for its theming. There's just something about the aesthetics of this restaurant that reminds me of a couple of different parts of the Indiana Jones trilogy. The first one being that sort of bar tavern where he first meets Marion Ravenwood and Raiders of the Lost Ark, and also a little bit it has a feel of that sort of Egyptian restaurant where he has a sit down with the main protagonist of Raiders, who of course the name is now escaping me. Now, I don't think the Yak and Yeti looks specifically or like completely like one or the other, but I think together it has a lot of elements that reminds me of the sort of rustic and exotic feel to both of those locations in Raiders of the Lost Ark. And so I feel like if I were to sit down and eat here, I could feel like, you know, I was in some faraway land eating in between an adventure, which I'm sure Indiana Jones has to do eventually, right? You can't just live off of Cliff Bars. I don't think they had Cliff Bars back then. And then finally, what better way to end off the day after eating than to check out Dinosaur over in Dinoland USA in the Animal Kingdom. Now, this is another one that I feel like I need to defend because there are no dinosaurs in Indiana Jones or time travel or anything like that. But again, this is one that I picked, I think, largely for the jungle setting that this attraction takes place in. You know, it is very thick, very undeveloped land, which is sort of Indiana Jones's playground for the most part. and it sort of has that adventurous feel, right? The whole premise of this attraction is that you're sort of breaking the rules and you're going to get this valuable treasure, which in this case turns out to be a live dinosaur, but you know, it's one that is a dangerous adventure nonetheless, and it has you running into giant things that you'd be afraid of. And I just feel like if Indiana Jones had access to time travel, this would probably be the kind of adventure that he would go on. Now, if, let's say, there was hypothetically a fourth Indiana Jones film, and hypothetically in this film there was a scene where they were driving through the jungle in a Jeep and there were monkeys swinging and you were fighting Russians, then perhaps this shaky Jeep ride system could be very reminiscent of that. But of course, you know, no such film exists with no such scenes, so it's sort of, you know, just all speculation at this point, and really it would sort of be a silly scene to write anyway, so I don't think it would ever come to fruition. So there you have it. That is what I would put together if I needed to make a Disney World playlist for Indiana Jones. Now, hopefully you have a better idea of sort of where I'm going with the series. They're not very literal connections to the theme. They're definitely not realistic itineraries that anybody would ever... I mean, it would take that full day just to ride 5 attractions, but I think it's a cool way to take to approach these attractions and look at them from a different light. You know, I think before this video, if I were to say, what does, you know, Big Thunder Mountain Railroad remind you of, I'm sure nobody would have said Indiana Jones, but maybe, hopefully, some people can see the very loose connection there, and I think it's a cool way for other people, you know, like what would be in your Indiana Jones playlist? Maybe there are attractions that I've left out that you think belong there, or maybe you think some of my options just don't really belong there at all. In either case, you should let me know in the comments below. I'd love to hear what you guys would put in your Indiana Jones playlist at Walt Disney World, and if you have an idea for a playlist, feel free to throw those ideas out there as well. I do have a list of topics that I would love to do in the future, but I'm always open to new ideas, and I've already spoken to Christine, and I think she is totally on board to do 1 or 2 playlists of her own. So hopefully this series has a long future ahead of it. I hope you enjoyed it. Whatever you're doing this weekend, make the most of it because it makes it that much better. And I hope to see you all next time for the next episode of Disney World Playlists. Bye, everybody.